All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leah Belsky, and I'm the Chief Enterprise Officer at Coursera. I'm honored to be joined here today by this panel of experts to tackle the topic of employers as educators. As we know, the world is in the midst of a major digital transformation. Take e-commerce technology, for example. Since the start of COVID, we've seen more adoption of e-commerce in the past 3 months than we've seen over the prior decade. What that means is there's now increasing pressure on the global education system to produce skilled talent to meet this demand. The hypothesis of the people on this panel today is that employers are going to have to play a much larger role in the future of global education than they have to date. And I'll leave it to you to decide whether you agree or disagree with that hypothesis when we finish the panel. I've also told these folks that if they disagree with each other, if they make anyone laugh, if they jump in, they get extra virtual ASU GSV points. So I hope we're in for a lovely and exciting, energized discussion. So with that, I'd like to kick us off with the first question. And if each of the panelists could also take 30 seconds to introduce themselves as well. How has your company played a role as a global educator? Ken, you want to kick us off first?
Oh, Ken is on mute.
Apologize. Ken Eisner. So I am the Worldwide Director of Education Programs for Amazon Web Services. I've been at Amazon for about 7 years, launched and founded one of our largest education to workforce programs called AWS Educate. Leah, to answer your question, I think the first thing is it really does shower us with humility. The real educators, the people who are doing it, every day, are those people in front of our children at K-12 and higher ed. They're the heroes. We're only a piece of the puzzle. But the second thing gets to, I believe that industry needs to play an essential role in education. I listened to this wonderful, extremely provocative playback of an ASU GSV panel following the tragic killing of George Floyd. I recommend everybody do it. It's in the middle of June. It was in this all-black panel that dealt with it. And I was particularly taken by this statement by Phyllis Lockett, the CEO of LEAP. She said, "What is the point of education? I'm tired of people talking about education so that they can be happy and they can have joy. I'm tired of people, the joy in the American dream is access to wealth. And until we talk about education as being a pathway for the purposes of developing talent and wealth creation, we are not going to put a dent in this." I believe that's industry's role. It's that pathway into careers, to income, and to wealth creation. This conveys a deep responsibility that we have to partner with education to get into those possibilities. Take me really quickly to number 3, that gets to our role as educators. From AWS's point of view, the cloud has driven a lot of innovation. It was AWS was the fastest IT company to ever hit a $10 billion yearly run rate. It's now a $40 billion yearly company. And that is leading to a giant workforce opportunity. Cloud computing has been the #1 LinkedIn skill for 4 out of the 5 past years. And so we've developed programs like AWS Educate, which helps academic institutions align their new and existing curricula to the most in-demand jobs in the cloud, and AWS Academy that provides end-to-end curriculum on the pathway of certification as vital assets. We play a role in helping education move at speed to these jobs and helping them disrupt their traditional models. And lastly, we also, with this, employers as educators today, it does focus deeply on inclusivity and our role in driving diversity within our organizations. I'm proud of the role that Amazon AWS has been doing in this, but we all take this deeply to heart.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ken. Vicki, how about you? Can you introduce yourself and share the role that your company has played?
Absolutely. Thank you, Leah. So I am a senior principal at Discover Financial Services, and I have a compilation of experiences in learning and development, HR consulting, talent acquisition, employer brand, as well as running my own career coaching practice. So I am very excited to be part of this panel and this discussion today. So for me, employers as educators means that you have to use more ingredients when you make that decision to become both an employer and an educator. My company's ability to be both was birthed out of some of our key guiding principles, like promoting from within and doing the right thing and having a philanthropic spirit. And in a traditionally conservative industry, which bends really towards only using normal retroactive and predictive analytics to make up the formula for ROI, things like retention and promotions and how to build and measure future skill capabilities needed, layering in those guiding principles really engaged our heart for humanity and the greater good, which made the difference in being first to market and staying ahead of the trends for the future of work. Because we listened with both our head and our heart for creating the ROI for being an employer educator. So I really deeply believe in engaging your head and your heart. So we are educators through a robust set of leadership development, professional development, and education assistance benefits with upskilling and reskilling priorities up and down our organization. And that really just fuels thought leaders with future-proof capabilities who continuously bring insights and innovations to the table. So it's really exciting to be an employer and an educator with lots of fringe benefits.
Awesome. Thank you, Vicki. And just one question. I think the language you use is interesting, engaging the heart of your employees as well. What do you mean by that?
So, people do things really out of emotive reasons. So, just getting people engaged around going back to school and having more of a learning mentality while working is really how we've engaged them that way.
Cool. Awesome. Jeremy, how about you? You work for AT&T.
Thanks, Leah.
Yourself.
Absolutely. So my name is Jeremy Sieffert. I'm a director of training for AT&T University, which is our corporate university. I've got 20 years with AT&T and 13 of those in adult learning. And AT&T is an educator. So I'm gonna kind of play off something Vicki said in capturing the heart. And I think we've encompassed that as an organization with our culture of continuous learning. So when we look internally for how we want to educate our employees, we've created a model, a culture of continuous learning that isn't just focused on doing the training that companies require around compliance or how you move the widgets or the nuts and bolts of your job, but provide an ecosystem that allows for employees to understand where they are in their careers, set a goal, and then provide them pathways to that goal. And that pathway will include many different stops along the way. It could be content that's created internally, could be content that's sourced from great vendors in different areas like that. And then beyond that, I think the second part of that, I think is critical for companies of scale, is to be able to leverage those relationships that you build in an enterprise perspective and bring them out to the greater good through other philanthropic efforts, which is another area that AT&T's partnered in the past and continues to partner forward by leveraging a lot of the great relationships that we have with vendors to bring that content out to areas of the country and communities that are in need of educational opportunities.
Great. And Jon, what about you?
Well, first of all, I have to admit, I am not Patty Money. So Patty Money is the Chief People Officer at Twilio, and she was my predecessor on this board. She stepped aside, and they called me up from the dugout. They said, "Please come in and hit for Patty." So if you like what I say, it's because it's my own. If you don't like what I say, it's because Patty told me to say this. My name is Jon Kaplan. I run my own consulting firm called Corventus Consulting. I have a 25 years career in the learning and development industry. I started my career as a high school teacher. I founded a charter school that was a public-private partnership, and I've been in the L&D industry in corporate America, most recently as the Chief Learning Officer at Discover Financial Services. So, when you think about why employers need to step forward and be thinking of themselves as educators, the first thing to recognize is that jobs and careers have become far more specialized across the entire globe over the past century. And if you think about, I'm reading a book called The Great Pandemic, and it's about the Spanish influenza. And in the turn of the century, it took 2 years to become a doctor. I mean, that's it. And 2 years actually wasn't profound study for 2 years. I mean, it was basically, they pretty much admit anyone. It was, it took more to become a dentist. If you want to become an ophthalmological surgeon right now, it's 10 years of practice, after getting a college degree. And this is what's happened across every single industry, is that the jobs are more complicated. So the education needs are much, much more. In addition, I think you look at this and say colleges, the expense of post-secondary education in the United States has gotten astronomical, and it's leaving out an enormous number of people who just can't afford it. There are many reasons why college education becomes so expensive. A lot of it is because it's reacting to the increased specialization of job roles. But colleges are leaving out more and more people. And I think you have to look at our federal deficit and our state deficits and recognize that there's no governmental help coming to bridge the gap. So what other institutions are there in society that can make up this gap and help prepare people for more specialized job roles? Well, I mean, there are community-based organizations like workforce development boards that are working really hard at this. But if you really think about the organizations that have the most, firepower to throw at this, it's corporations in the United States. So I look at this from a perspective of, like, if anyone's going to solve this problem, corporations are going to have a huge hand in this.
Great, thank you. So we've now met all of our esteemed panelists. They are all locked in their homes, have now had months to think about how the world is changing, and have likely been asked, Jon by other organizations, and Vicki, Jeremy, and Ken by the organizations they work for, what more can they do as leaders? And so my question is, you've all been working in this field for a very long time. How has the way you see your job and what you need to do at your company changed since COVID? And Ken, let's go to you first.
Yeah. So one thing that Jon mentioned was the need for us to the great growth in skills. I think that one of the biggest things that employers can give to learners as a whole is that hands-on real-world practice, but also the ability to deal with ambiguity. Right now, I don't think education particularly sets our kids up well for dealing with that grand level of change. Obviously, COVID was this giant change that came into the environment. So, some things that we did. One, we wanted to make sure that we want to do whatever we could to help education move quickly into technology, into digital means, into digital access. So we offered a few of our resources we spun them up bigger, and we offered them for promotional value in order to get people into the cloud quickly and get that experimentation going. Two, educators were grappling with the ability to teach online and to take their classes online. So we spun up some resources to help them. I think the one thing, though, that I'm most interested in is, will this actually deliver lasting change? Right now, education does not move as quickly as it needs to be. While we are employers at scale that need workers, we need talent, we're not able to impact education in a way that gets it going as fast and as aligned to us as it need be. So I'm just hoping, the pathways that Jeremy talks about, the engaging learners over their life and, taking the heart of the employee, but turning them into lifelong learners, happens. So, there's interesting things that have happened in the short term. I'm really interested in the bigger structural things that happen, over time and, take seed.
Cool. And Jeremy, what about you?
Ken, Yeah, I would say when we look at the impacts of COVID, I'm going to probably speak to it more from an internal enterprise perspective because of the volume of employees that AT&T has and the volume of training that we do. Pre-COVID, we were already, as an organization, moving towards a path of virtualization. In fact, of our leader-led training pre-COVID, about 20 to 25% of that training was already being delivered through a virtual medium, some a Zoom format like we do here. We actually have a full broadcast studio where we do interactive two-way training that's more like watching a news broadcast and interacting with news broadcasters, if you will. So we've been on that path for a few years. But what COVID did for us was it escalated probably what was a 3 to 5 year plan into about a 45-day plan, where we had business units and parts of the organization that were resistant to virtual training that said, no, we really have to do this still hands-on, or we still want to be in the classroom. And suddenly they had no choice. So they had to pivot in order to continue with certain trainings. And we went from about a 60 to 70-30 split of leader-led virtual to a few months between March and April when the company made the decision to send everybody home, basically, to doing all of our virtual training, about 95% virtually. There's some classes that we had to cancel, and we're starting to bring a little bit of that face-to-face back on, because at some components within our company, you have to have somebody prove they can climb a telephone pole or can splice fiber, and we haven't quite figured out how to do that completely virtual. But what we've done is we've been able to virtualize a lot of components of training. So we're starting to see a lot more mixed modalities where it's more, instead of 8 hours or 2 weeks of in-person training, it's a few hours of self-paced, then some virtual, then some leader-led. We're bringing in some AR and some VR technologies that we're able to employ to reduce travel. So really what I've seen it do is I've seen it escalate a trend that we've already started down to just escalated it exponentially from 3 to 5 years to about 2 months.
And Jeremy, and just to win some points in terms of that interrupting board that Leah pushes out. Yeah, I would agree. So there's several things that we virtualized our certification pathways that enable people to take certification tests online at a much quicker route. We virtualize all our internships, interning, apprenticeships. We all want to do, and we all want to give that hands-on practice, but it can be difficult to scale if you're doing it in person and you have an individual manager responsible for an individual employee. So that pathway of virtualized internships were really good. And then the last thing I'd say is we had a number of things going around diversity and our focus there, but the heightened focus around diversity activities and our leaders going out there and talking about Black Lives Matter and other things, and that perspective starting to go global on it. Really important stuff. Again, we want to see that lasting change and that impact on educational systems, but that has been important for us.
Yeah. So Ken,
Absolutely.
I'm going to participate in this little contest too. It's nice that all of your internships and your education pathways have gone virtual, but I wouldn't call that like systemic or fundamental change in the way we educate. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think it's a pathway. We have something called invent and simplify, along. So we do not, there's think big as an Amazon principle, and then there's invent and simplify. I think the process that we're going through with virtualizing our internships and getting to inspect the things that drive outcomes for people on that workforce path, the thing that tells us we can scale this or not, I think are rapidly being found out. So no, it isn't structural change, but to Jeremy's point, these are things that are helping us rapidly compress that innovation timeline.
That's good. Now, you started talking a little bit about internships and workforce development. And Vicki, I know Discover has done lots of interesting things in this space. Can you tell us a little bit about Discover's work in the workforce space and where you think that's headed?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things I think that's really difficult to get right is the making your workforce development model really have economic opportunity. And I think one of the things that we've been pushing towards and making progress in is making it that part of our explicit goals and sort of being fanatically consistent about measuring and improving both our academic and our employment outcomes, and looking for correlations between the two. So academically, like things like persistence and completion, whether it's degrees or short form, certificates and things like that. And then the most popular, obvious employment outcomes are both promotion and retention. But like I said, it's the hardest part for us to get right, because we risk things like possibly over-indexing in promotions before folks are truly ready as a trade-off to playing it safe and not promoting. But we're working on that hard to do that, and then to align our portfolio in a way that we can correlate education and economic opportunity the majority of the time. So that's definitely something in our workforce development model that we're working on hard. The only other thing I would mention, Leah, is because true economic impact happens outside of the four walls of companies. I've been impressed by the fact that thought leaders have also formed consortiums to talk about outskilling and other ways to skill build across corporations. So I feel like this is an area that will continue to evolve through those discussions that we'll all be able to contribute to shaping.
Awesome. And so one final question for everyone before we go to Q&A. And Jon, if you could kick us first. If you were to describe in one sentence the biggest impact that you think COVID will have on the future role of companies as educators, what would that be?
Yeah, so in one sentence, I think we have an opportunity to bridge the rural-urban divide in the United States. I mean, if you think about this, the McKinsey Global Institute put out a great study at the end of last year, I believe. They talked about probably the biggest divide in the United States right now is not necessarily racial, it's not class-based, it's not gender, it's actually urban-rural. And there are large parts of America that are completely left out of the economic growth that's happened since the late 80s. And that's essentially a lot of what's going on in our political environment is actually a mirror of the fact that in order to be part of the economic prosperity in the 21st century, you've had to be near cities. And I think the thing with everyone shifting to online delivery of educational content, we actually have an opportunity to lift up people who haven't had opportunities because they don't live close to cities. I think in addition, corporations will start being, I think everyone is realized their talent pool is much bigger if you don't have to hire near your headquarters or near your operations center. And I think many companies are starting to look and say, look, we think we can hire, now that we have all our education and upskilling and training and job performance development that is going on virtually, we can hire anyone in any part of the United States. And I think that's really, really a hopeful thing that's happening with all of the movement to online training and online development.
Jeremy, primary impact that you think COVID will have on the future trajectory of employers as educators?
So I think the impact will be in the escalations of the technologies that are used for training. As companies and schools have been forced to do things online, there's frankly going to be a lot of people that don't want to return to a classroom, to a traditional setting. There's just too many opportunities to continue down this trajectory. So I believe that a lot of the technologies that large enterprise uses to scale internally will very quickly be able to use to bring some of those opportunities externally in those areas that Jon talked about that are have been underserved and not had opportunities. This will allow for a lot of programs, I think, to be scaled much quicker than what they may have done in the past, because you would not have thought about taking it to those areas virtually. You would have thought about taking it to those areas in person, and with that no longer an option, it just opens things up. I don't know if we lost Leah, but I'm going to kick it over to Vicki to answer.
There she is.
Vicki, pass it over. Thank you, guys. Vicki, lasting impact of COVID in education, then we're going to go to the audience questions.
It's a lot of it's been talked about, the unique and unprecedented circumstances calls for unique and unprecedented action. So we've all experienced the speed thing, because we had the right stimulus. That's just been wonderful because, what used to take 2 years or look like their obstacles seemed unmovable. Now everybody looks at that at a whole different light. But the one thing that I would say that we've done is we've taken sort of mutually exclusive things. So even though we've always offered these types of opportunities and benefits to our employees, sometimes formal education specifically was more of a mutually exclusive activity from your actual employment. But we've brought those things together through celebration, because all of the traditional things that was happening around that were canceled or postponed, and so we stood in that gap, and I think we built some infrastructure around how to celebrate our employees that wasn't happening before. It seems like a pretty simple thing, but we're excited about being able to continue on those trends that we've built because of the circumstances.
Cool. All right. So let's go to some of the questions now. Vicki, so you excited people when you talked about engaging the heart in education, and I think there's a thirst to understand a little bit more. So how does Discover engage the heart of learners, and how would you recommend other organizations engage the heart?
I think it starts with your leaders and making sure that things are being done out of both the fact that you can invest in employees and get return, but also being done out of the greater good. So engaging the hearts of the employees, I think if once they know that you're looking for a return on your investment, but you're also looking to help them to succeed in your organization. And like I talked about before, in some cases where, maybe you can foresee that jobs might be impacted, you can help them also transition into roles that will help them continue their careers even outside of your organization. Like one of the things that I've been really impressed by, and probably because we're part of this equation, is just this idea that we can help you, we can educate you, we can help you professionally develop, and maybe that doesn't mean that you end up with a career in our company, but that we still feel good about that. We still feel good that we helped you get to the place where you were looking to go. So I would say you definitely have to start with your leaders and make sure that they're on the same page in executing that type of strategy.
Leah, maybe I can add just one thing here, is that there's been a lot of work done in learning science and brain biochemistry around learning, and really learning is just a fundamentally emotional process, and that's something I think early practitioners of learning didn't fully understand. But you really can't have solid, real deep learning without connecting to the emotional centers of the brain. And I think the idea that you can have purely sort of scientific a learning experience without an emotional experience is a fallacy. And so you actually do have to have learning that connects both to the brain and to the heart.
Thanks. All right, let's go in a little bit of a different direction. So a good bulk of the audience at GSB and the people on panels are actually from universities. And I know each of your companies has historically had programs to engage universities. But do you think as we look into the future, people like you should be engaging universities even more, and if so, how?
Yeah. Do you want me to take a shot?
Yeah, you can go first. Yeah.
So the first thing is we have to give them a framework to adapt by. What we did was we created this cloud competency framework where we researched the most in-demand jobs in cloud computing, from software development to the data side, and so on. And then develop the level 1 through 3 knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to 10. it's heavily skill directed, but we also work on some of the competencies that Amazon leverages in order to help institutions modify. But then the second thing is we need to be flexible. And so we do not, we have end-to-end curriculum, but we also enable institutions to alter their curriculum. We put in a project-based learning lab so you can use AWS's stuff, and we partner at scale because we want to make sure that institutions across the entire state, we partner with Virginia, Texas, Louisiana, Utah in the US, and then we partner with Singapore and Taiwan and so on abroad to enable them to adapt that curricula across both from a width perspective, but also depth, so that it's pathways, K-12 into higher ed, and then into lifelong learning. One of my hopes is that COVID speeds us along to disintegrating the degree centricity and moving our institutions towards more of an ROI centricity, where there's definite outcomes of jobs, careers, internships, and that educational institutions are saying, hey, industry, not only do you help us on the work, but ensure that you're going to hire people, coming out the backside.
Right. So Jon, go for it.
I'm sorry, Leah, can I just ask him a quick question? Because he talked about something that I'm interested in. And we call it contextualizing degrees. So Ken, when you talk about working with those universities, like, are you also pushing on like their model, like that it to help them sort of evolve in that space as well?
Yeah, I mean, we do working backwards process with universities to help. We have this thing called a Cloud Innovation Center, which actually helps to do that, to work backwards from what the issue is. And so if you look across, we work heavily with community colleges, for instance, vocational institutions globally. And actually you've seen this major growth happening in multi-course specializations and certificates, as opposed to degrees, which have relatively steady. That's not happening quick enough. Everybody needs to be a lifelong learner. We should all be going back to education, whether it's at Coursera, whether it's at a community college, and so on. And yet we're not doing that enough. Education is, has them until X age, and then we push them over into companies, and then it changes into an L&D argument. That needs to be, should be brought together. And we do help institutions think about it in terms of that lifelong opportunity.
Okay.
So, and by the way, Vicki, you just won some points. Jon, so on the one hand, I'm really inspired by all the ways in which Amazon is extending its reach and enabling people to develop skills. On the other hand, it's a little bit scary, right? Like, educational institutions also have a core role to play in society of enabling critical thinking, developing citizens, not just, creating skills, and certainly not creating skills for one of the largest global tech companies in the world. Is there an underbelly to any of what we see major tech companies like Amazon doing?
I mean, it's hard to say right now. It's still early days and everyone's experimenting with the model. But I can tell you there's probably some criteria that we could establish to look at whether or not these are really good programs and whether or not they help individuals and they help society at large. I mean, I think the first one, are these programs helping address college affordability and increasing inclusion in the United States? I think that's number one. Do we see people who don't have the means to pay for college? Do we see increasingly diverse, population coming into these programs? I think if yes, I think that's an important criteria. I think the second is this real deep learning that they're doing? I mean, there are many programs where it's just work study and it's heavy emphasis on the work, right? But when you come out of the program, do you have any additional skills, or do you just know how to do a bunch of tasks that a company has asked you to do? And so I think we should look for, there are many models that are wonderful in that they allow people to apply the learning that they've undertaken in a variety of areas. And, there are externships, internships, all these different things that allow people to have real applicability and, understand how all the pieces fit together. So the second criteria is it real learning? Is it deep learning? Is it profound learning? The third is, I think, whether or not the jobs that these people move into, whether or not they have upward potential, or whether or not they are jobs that are temporary in nature and are going to be automated or outsourced, at the earliest convenience. And I think we don't know yet, right? So, but I do think that that's probably the three criteria that we should look at. Are we expanding opportunity? Are we providing deep learning? And are we providing economic opportunity and long-term economic opportunity for the people who come out of these programs?
Before turning over to Jeremy, I absolutely agree with Jon's point, and that is, those things are very much a part of what we do, and also why we choose to partner, to collaborate with educational institutions at scale, as opposed to just doing everything direct.
Yeah, one thing I think is a missing cog in that hasn't been discussed is when you have enterprises at the size of Amazon or AT&T, Google, those types of enterprises that are working directly with universities or with other entities that are non-accredited entities like a Coursera or a Udacity or a company like that. When these large companies work on that internally and they accept that learning internally as skills growth, and they see their own employees demonstrating a learned skill and advancing in their own careers, that carries over into the marketplace, because now you have people external to those companies that may not have college degrees, but then are able to pursue those same certifications through these companies, or non-degree seeking students are able to get certifications that these large employers now understand, accept, and in some cases sponsor and have their names attached to, because they've helped build some of that curriculum. So I think starts to build an ecosystem that provides credentialing to folks that may not be on a career trajectory to go after a full degree, because they may not need that to get into this IT field. They just may need to be able to get their foot in the door, because we've seen some of that over the years as we built some of those relationships.
Jeremy, one addition to that we have to think of, especially with the largest companies, is that large companies actually have an oversized role in the labor market. And in some communities, there's really only one or two hiring entities. Amazon could be one of them, for example. And I think the thing is, right, we actually should worry about market power in the labor market. And you have what's called a monopsony, where you have only one buyer of a particular good or service. In this case, it's labor. And I think that, to the extent that, these development programs extend a corporation's monopsony power in the labor market, I think we really should be worried about it. But I think, Amazon plays in a lot of different markets. And I think the evidence that I've seen is that only exists in a few areas. But I mean, as we see more and more consolidation, especially among tech firms, do we end up in a place, 5 or 10 years from now, where we really do have to worry about the outsized influence of a few players in the labor market that overall depresses wages across the board?
Yeah, I think, it's, while, not addressing that point directly, what I would say is, Amazon, when we've been working with, Los Angeles, we're working very heavily with Los Angeles Economic Development Corporation, and in Louisiana with Greater New Orleans, and with our customers and partners. The great job opportunity in technology in the cloud is massive, and it's massive around the millions of customers who use AWS, as well as use other cloud providers. So, and these are great paying jobs. So we want to just make sure that we're working across these, many companies, and hand in hand with government to open up those opportunities for students.
Yeah. So to be clear, the monopsony power of hiring companies, at least on the Amazon side, has nothing to do with AWS. It's actually in the warehousing industry, where if they're the only warehouse in your town, Amazon would have pricing power in terms of wages. And I don't think we're a long ways to where there's going to be pricing power of corporations around particular engineering skills. But it is something. It is something that you have to worry about in the long run. And I would also say that there's only one thing worse than only one company that has the ability to price labor, and it's when no one is interested in pricing labor and coming in and hiring people. And so, I actually think in a lot of these communities, if the Amazon warehouse leaves, there are no jobs. And so, I think the current situation may be much better than the alternative.
All right. Well, thank you all. We are now at time. This is the beginning of what I think is going to be a long and intense conversation through the coming months and years. But it's a pleasure getting to speak with all of you. You won a lot of points as well, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.